they were interacting with only Jews. I mean, really, only Jews. There were very few. There were very few Jews that would be meeting and interacting and doing business with Gentiles. So we lived in a Jewish bubble. We don't, most of us today, with the exception of me and a few other people that are Jewish professionals, if you will. But we sometimes we take for granted this issue, but other times we don't, and we shouldn't. And we also don't need to be depressed by it. A lot of people, when they see a worldwide Jewish number of 16 million or so, they get depressed by that. And there is definitely reasons to be sad about it, because as was reported, I think a couple of weeks ago, the world Jewish population today is right about where it was before World War II started. So there are numerically about as many Jews in the world today as there was in 1939.
Wow.
And there's obviously a lot more people. So as a percentage of the world, we're shrinking. Our population overall has shrunk a lot. And even in America, we've kind of been holding it around 2%, a little under 2%. In 1930s, we were probably closer to 2.5%, 3%. So the numbers here are higher numerically, but smaller percentage-wise. But there are a lot of times in Jewish history where in pretty much all of Jewish history, where we've been a small minority. I mean, there was a time in the early years of Christianity, the first probably 200 years of Christianity, there were more Jews than there were Christians. So there obviously was a time, I mean, when Jesus in his first couple of generations, where there were about as many Jews as there were, when there were more Jews than Christians. But then about 150, 200 years later, there were, after the war against the Romans, which killed millions of Jews, after other rebellions like the Bar Kokhba revolt that killed maybe another million Jews, that there was a time around maybe 200, 300 where the Christian world population overtook the Jewish world population. It's hard to know for sure because the records are so incomplete. But ever since that time, obviously there have been more Christians than Jews. And then later on, 600, 700 of the Common Era, there were more Muslims than there were Jews. Within a very quick period of time, the spread of Islam across North Africa and the Middle East, there were more Muslims.
But Rabbi, in the year 200, what you were saying, when Christianity kind of took over population than Jews, but weren't most Christians still kind of Jewish at that time?
I would say that by about 300, so sometime between 200 and 300, it wasn't like officially they woke up one morning and said, we're not Jewish anymore. But by about 200, and then definitely by 300, they weren't being confused anymore. Part of it was because the Romans, as they became Christian, more and more Christianized, they dealt with Christianity. Obviously, at first they were persecuting Christians, and then when they finally stopped persecuting Christians, it was they had to deal with a huge population within their community, and so they flipped. And so immediately when Christianity became the official religion of Rome, almost immediately when that happened, I mean, literally when that happened, then Judaism became a persecuted minority. It didn't,
Gotcha.
That switch flipped. Once the Christians took over Rome, it got bad for Jews, but it happened once they became the official religion. Up until that time, Christianity was oftentimes persecuted more than Judaism. And so once that switch flipped, then it was bad. During the early Byzantine Empire, and sometimes it got really bad. But I want to point out that throughout Jewish history, again, with the exception again of Christianity and Islam that were outgrowths of Judaism and were influenced heavily, obviously, by Judaism, before that, Judaism was a minority religion in the Greco-Roman Empire. It was a minority religion in Egypt for when we lived there. And we've confronted being a minority to some extent for a long time. There has been this kind of recognition that that's part of who we are. But again, when we were a minority in the Greco-Roman Empire, nobody would have ever thought that our religion was going to succeed, and everybody who worshiped Zeus and Jupiter would be killed or made foolish by the Christians and their descendants. So nobody would have assumed that this would happen. Nobody would have bet on the Jewish people being the ones who survived. And the same thing happened in Persia, where the Zoroastrians were the major religion, and then there are no more. There are a couple hundred thousand Zoroastrians in the whole world. So Judaism's always had this kind of problem of not being a majority religion, and the numbers here are what we deal with at the beginning of Numbers. This is the numbering. This is when we talk about what we learn in this portion. We learn that the numbering that when we look at numbers and talk about it with Jewish demographics, if you will, it can be disheartening, but it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be disheartening. It doesn't have to be something that gets us down. It can. I mean, I'm not saying there aren't lessons to take away by how many Jews have died through persecutions and murders, but people have counted out the Jewish people for a long time numerically and said there's no way that we can survive the onslaught of people, just the mass of humanity that we're up against. And we've never been subsumed. So it does give us something to think about when we read Numbers, this concept, whenever we're confronted with this beginning. Let's take a look. So it says specifically that you and Aaron shall record them by their groups from the age of 20 years and up, all those who are able to bear arms. So it's right at the beginning. There's no speculation on why we're counting these people. We're counting them to figure out how many soldiers we've got, how many people we have if we have to go to war. And any of these battles, by the way, that we're going to talk about are still many days in the ahead. We did have a battle with the Amalekites already, but this desire to count us out maybe seems a little, well, it turns out to be really premature, because the battles that we talk about are coming up in the next generation. Most importantly, of course, is that the tribes are counted out, and the numbers are associated in this portion. And quite frankly, basically whatever we have counts of people in the Torah, with the exception of the ones that during the time of King David, that we really are starting to focus on how many people are in each tribe. And so we have a tribal list. These lists start off with Reuven, with the oldest son of Jacob, and then we go by their heads, by the head of each tribe. And so it gives us Elazar, Shimon, the tribal head is Shalumiel. Most of these names are not necessarily names you find in today's common Hebrew names, but some of them are. Like the next one, Nachshon. Nachshon is the head of the tribe of Judah. Nachshon is still a very respectable name in Hebrew. And the next name, Nathaniel, it's kind of a version of Nathaniel, also not an uncommon name. Nachshon is one of the heroes because, according to the Midrash, he's the one who walked into the Sea of Reeds and had the sea parted when he went up to literally covered his head, show it as a sign of faith. Then we get the sons of Joseph, and so Joseph's children are divided up. Ephraim, the tribe of Ephraim, and the tribe of Manasseh, that those tribes have their own heads. Benjamin, Dan, Asher, Gad, Naphtali. Now you notice the tribe of the Levites are not listed. Joseph's tribe is split into two, and the Levites are not listed. Well, we get a separate listing of the Levites. And the Levites, the story of how the Levites are counted is very important in the book of Numbers. And it seems to be, again, if not the point of this book, it's definitely a point of this book. Because as much as we get a numbering and a counting of the tribes, we get a counting and a breakdown of the tribe of Levi even more so. And so we have a whole chapter dedicated to that. So this is the it says the elected chieftains, the heads of the tribes. These are the leaders. And so the leaders of the tribe, it says on the first day of the second month, they convoke the whole community who are registered by the clans of their ancestral houses, the names of those aged 20 being listed head by head. And as the Lord had commanded Moses, so he recorded them in the wilderness. And then we get the breakdown of each tribe. We get the numbers of each tribe. So we get Reuven, 46,500. Shimon, 59,300. Now, I'm not necessarily, well, we can take a look. God, 45,000.
Rabbi, these numbers are kind of probably exaggerated.
Well, it's not that it, so we know we're going to get to around 600. We're actually going to get to 603,000.
Right.
Which is how many men we know left Egypt. So we have roughly the same amount of people, which makes sense because it's only a year later, or 2 years later. It's not quite whatever. It's a little over a year later. It shouldn't surprise us that we have roughly the same amount of people, or men, I should say, men of the age of 20 to 60. But we do have a number which seems really, really high. And so there is the theory that exists that these numbers actually reflect a much later period in the tribal history when there might have been roughly this many people or close to this many people, maybe half as many, maybe twice as many, that this reflects maybe a fraction of how many people that were maybe part of the tribes 200 years later, 300 years later. Part of the problem is because we don't see millions of people coming into the land of Israel a generation or so later with Joshua. So because we don't see a mass exodus of a couple million people, there's the theory that this reflects the tribal numbers. Also, the question of how many the land of Israel supported, we don't have archaeological remains that give us that this idea that in the time of Joshua and Moses, during this time, the land would have sustained it. Not only that, could the desert have sustained this many people? The wilderness. It's not likely that this many people can live and at least congregate in the wilderness. So the problem then exists, why are the numbers so high? And then it is possible that maybe 300 years later, that there are roughly this many people living in the land of Israel, maybe during the time of King David. And then those numbers would bear out. The problem would then be, well, why did they not take into consideration, the exponential growth of the community once they settled in the land of Israel? We don't know. It's not, we're missing the numbers, the mathematics to know why it's inflated. But it is very possible that these numbers do reflect a later period of for the people. So it could be that is, that this is going to, these numbers will be numbers that we have later. So just so you know, when we look at these numbers, and I'm going to show you a map in a second, but if we look at what these numbers mean as far as percentage wise, well, let's go through some of the numbers. The average is something close to where each tribe would be about 6 to 9%, which would again give us, there's 12 tribes, not including the Levites. The Levites would be the 13th tribe, but there'd be 12 tribes here, and each one of them would on average, be about, would have to be about 7.5% to get us to, or 8 point whatever, 2% or whatever, to get us to the total 12 tribes. So the average should be around there. Some are bigger and some are a little smaller. The tribe of Ephraim and Benjamin are both smaller as far as these other tribes. So if Shimon has 59,000, God has 45,000. You can see Judah is the largest tribe. They're 74,000. And it could be that Judah just was a really big tribe. But we do know that by the time of King David, who was from the tribe of Judah, that Judah was a really big, powerful tribe on its own. But when we get to Issachar, again, 54,000, Zvulun, Zebulun, 57,000. And then we get to the descendants of Joseph, and we have 40,000 there and 32,000 there. Now, those are on the smaller end. I mean, those would each be about, about 6% of the numbers. But if you add the two of them together, right, you get a pretty big tribe, right? You get about 72,000, almost 73,000. So what's interesting about that number is of Ephraim and Manasseh, that if you look at the biggest tribe, the tribe of Judah, it's almost the same. That the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh together, the Joseph tribes, if you will, are basically the same size as the tribe of Judah. And that these tribes did have a remarkable amount of power later on in the history of the Israelites, that these tribes were major tribes. So, for example, King David and his family, the Davidic dynasty, comes from the tribe of Judah. The other power center, if you will, well, we know that the first king, King Saul, is from the tribe of Benjamin, which we haven't gotten to yet. The other Rachel tribe, by the way, keep that in mind. Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin they're all Rachel people. They're all descendants of Rachel. That might be an important issue too, who your matriarch was, not just your patriarch, because these are all descendants of Jacob, but maybe your matriarch also said something important about you. So let's take a look at, let's take a look at, let me get rid of that. Let's take a look at, let's get to Benjamin. Benjamin had 35,000, which is definitely on the smaller side. But again, if you add up Benjamin and Ephraim and Manasseh, now you're talking about a bigger tribe. The Rachel tribe comes out pretty big. Dan had a pretty big population, which is interesting because later on we read that they actually have to split off and go into a different area of Israel because they seem to be too many. Tribe of Asher is 41,000, Naphtali 53,000. And that's the order that we get there. And again, we haven't gotten to the Levites, and we'll get to them in a sec. But again, you see that this 603,000. That's not including the Levites, by the way, because we had 603,000 just of those 12 tribes that were the non-Levitical tribes, if you will, the group that is able to bear arms, which means that the Levites were not supposed to be counted in battle. They were not supposed to go into battle. Not at least as soldiers. So that's an interesting idea that the Levites had a role to play as the priests, not as soldiers.
Yeah, I figured, Rabbi, when I got drafted, I was going to say that I was a Levite and I wasn't allowed to
use that as a way to get.
I was going to try that, but I never got drafted, so I didn't have to use it.
Yeah, that would be a convenient out. Interestingly, by the way, this is an issue in the land of Israel today, because we do have kind of the modern equivalent of this argument, because we have people that study in yeshiva who don't want to be called up into the army, and so they use their status as being yeshiva students to get them out of the draft. And this is a major issue within Israel. And essentially, again, from their reading of the Torah, they're the equivalent of priests, and they really do feel that they're doing holy work that should exempt them, if you will, from military service. So this is actually a serious issue within Israel today of whether people are going to be called into to military service, or whether, again, they should have an exemption from being counted. So here we have the Levites, however, were not recorded among their ancestral tribe. For the Lord had spoken to Moses, saying, "Do not on any account enroll the tribe of Levi or take a census of them with the Israelites." So let's keep that in mind. They're going to be separate, and they're going to be counted separate. So keep that in mind. Let's take a look at why and how this is all going to play out. I'm actually going to show you the diagram in a second. So you shall put the Levites in charge of the tabernacle of the Mishkan and all the things that are part of the Mishkan. They shall carry the tabernacle and all its furnishings, and they shall tend it, and they shall camp around the tabernacle. When the tabernacle is set out, the Levites shall take it down, and when the tabernacle is to be pitched, the Levites shall set it up. Any outsider who encroaches shall be put to death. This is a serious issue. So I do want to point out that the Levites, and again, I don't want to say that this is different from the modern day argument that's going on in Israel, but the Levites were actually involved in hard work. If you will, there was a manual labor component to their service. It wasn't just that they were offering up sacrifices, that they weren't just teaching and praying and taking care of the spiritual needs of the people. They got their hands dirty. You know, it says they had to pitch the tent, take down the tent. They had to stay healthy enough to do this hard work, but they also needed to stay kind of free from battle because they had to come into contact with holy vessels, and working and doing that kind of holy labor required them not to have blood on their hands, if you will. So keep that in mind. That also seems to be part of what's going on. But let's take a look at what it says when the Israelites shall camp troop by troop around the tabernacle of the pact, that the wrath may not strike the Israelite community. The Levites shall stand guard around the tabernacle of the pact. Now, let's just take a look at what this means. Oh, actually, we'll read it and then we'll show it. So it seems as though, again, the Levites had a role to play in order to keep the ark and the Mishkan around it, which is in a sense kind of like, you know, there's a Holy of Holies, there's a tent around it, bigger tent around that. That the Levites then are encircled around it, and then the rest of the Israelites are around them. And we'll take a look in a second at this. So when we get into chapter 2, now we get a breakdown of what this means. The Israelites shall camp with each with his standard under the banners of their ancestral house. They shall camp around the tent of meeting at a distance. And this definitely does seem a little Game of Thrones. And the word we came up with last week, Mike, did you come up with it, or did Erica Schwartz come up? It was the other Schwartz. It was the other Schwartz. It's called I forgot it again. The symbol. It's the Erica, where are you? It is I'm going to find it right now. It is called the
sigils.
Sigils. That's it. Thank you. The sigils. That we have these symbols that are that are really cool symbols of the tribes. Now, it doesn't say here what those symbols were, but in the imagination of the rabbis later on, the symbols were the images that Jacob used when he blessed the tribes, which is, for Benjamin a wolf, and for Judah a lion, and for Zebulun a ship, and for Gad tents. And so these images would have been on the banners. Just kind of a cool idea of those banners that were over the tribe, kind of the pageantry, if you will. That is you see that in the Kurosawa, movies with the Japanese, the different shogunates, the different families, that would go into battle, these great banners, these colored banners that they would carry.
I just imagine either, the Olympics, everybody's holding their banners, or the or the convention, the political conventions, and everybody's holding.
You're absolutely right, and I wasn't thinking so much the convention, because that's usually more cooperative. But there is that sense. I was just going to say that, Mike, at the Olympics when the countries
Yeah.
come up with their flags, and look, it's those are pretty, they're carrying a flag, and it's just the national flag, and the flags aren't too scary. Some of them are. Some of them have, like, swords and things like that on them, right? But most of them are pretty peaceful. But some of those banners, like, back in the day, were meant to inspire fear and awe, some kind of pride in your animal, your the colors, would be inspiring. So I imagine, kind of where we go with this. But again, this is definitely more cooperative, at least when they're around the ark. That this is more like, maybe like you were saying, like the nicer version of this that we have today, which is the Olympics, where people have their flag. But there are those flags and those banners, and those were really important. Your colors. We talk about capture the flag today. When we're kids, we play that game, capture the flag. But that was a big deal. When you went into battle with your flag, with your standard, getting that taken away, getting that taken from the guy who's carrying it, meant that your army was done. And so holding up that standard was a sign that you were still in the battle. Once it went down, it was bad. And so that flag that banner really meant something. That's why the Star Spangled Banner song is all about having that flag. That's why it says, "Oh, say does that Star Spangled Banner still wave?" Because that was the symbol that things were still okay. If you could see the banner, you knew your country was still alive. Your side was still fighting, still in the fight. So it is something that, we don't have that feeling necessarily about flags anymore, but it was up until modern warfare, and really we're talking about tanks and planes and World War One, really up until that time. I mean, up until pretty much actually, right around that time, around the 1900s, carrying that flag. I mean, there were people who, they gave up their lives holding up that flag for the rest of the army throughout human history. So it's, look, it's not something you want to talk about, but you've ever seen a war movie that was set back up through the Confederacy, you see guys in the Civil War holding the flag. Up until those times, holding that flag was an honor, and was something that people gave their lives to do. Because if you're holding that flag, assumedly you can't fight like, the person who has the gun or the knife, sword in their hands. You're holding up that flag, and you're essentially giving up your life to hold that flag. It was an honor, and it was a sacrifice. So flags were a big deal, and the banners. This is the word that we use, degel. We still use that word for flag in Israel today. All diglo, on the standard, on their banner, and the fact that it has that levet avotam there, that it is their ancestral house with those symbols, is really kind of cool to think about the tribes back then. And now we have the breakdown, of which tribes are in which areas. So we see camped at the front, the east side, the standard of the division of Judah, and then next to him was Issachar, and next to him was Zebulun. And then you have Judah. So there you have this group that's kind of led by Judah. You have this group here, which numbers 186,000. And it's kind of the division of Judah. So you have 12 tribes, not including the Levites. And you have this first division of first quarter of the army, the first three tribes, division of Judah. On the south, by the division of Reuven, you have the Reubenites, you have the Shimonites, and you have Gad. You can see they come out to about 151. It's called the division of Reuben. So we have the division of Judah, the division of Reuben, and next we go to the west. We have Ephraim, 40,000. Manasseh, related tribes, 32,000. And then the Benjaminites, 35,000. And guess what? They're all related. Those are the Rachel houses, folks. Those are the tribes, the three tribes that trace their ancestry back. Again, one tribe that's the tribe of Benjamin, and the other that's the tribe of Joseph, that's been split into two. So we have three tribes listed, but it's all, again, the descendants of Rachel. This is a Rachel section, if you will. Okay? And they come out to 108,000. So as you can see, a little bit smaller. It's getting a little smaller. A little bit smaller there. Next, you have the division of Dan. And you know that the Dan troop was pretty big, had 62,000. And then you have Asher, 41, and then Naphtali, 53. Now, all those tribes, by the way, Gad, Dan, and Dan, Asher, and Naphtali, those are all tribes that are kind of the, I wouldn't say the forgotten tribes, because we do read about people who are from the tribe of Dan. Samson, the very famous judge, is from the tribe of Dan. But those tribes are kind of the tribes of Jacob's children. In some cases, the Dan and Naphtali, these tribes are part of the Bilhah, if you will. Those are the tribes of the concubine of Jacob. But that these tribes kind of are the tribes that live in the center of Israel, in the center part of Israel, but that when we finally settle the land, but that they are kind of they're the, I don't want to say the flyover tribes, but they're the tribes that are very much like the heartland of Israel. And their total, you can see, is 157,000. So on average, it comes out to pretty close to about 150,000 per division. Let's take a look, because I know, let's do a little visual on this one. Hold on one second. I'm going to show this up right now for everybody to see, so that you can get a visual of this, of what this looked like. So give me one second, and I know I have this as a file that I made. There's an image you could see. Hold it one second. Hold it. Here. It's all the way up here at the top of my screen. Okay, hold it. I'm going to share. One sec. Everybody see it now?
Yeah.
Let me make it a little bit bigger. So let's take a look at the encampment here. So you can see, this is a better visual of it. You have the tabernacle in the middle, and we're about to get, so you didn't miss anything yet. We're about to get into the division of the Levites. So we're about to get into the Levitical breakdown, but you can see the tribes as they're arrayed around the tabernacle in the middle. So you've got the tribes, north, south, east, and west. You can see in bold, that's the kind of the lead of the tribe. In most cases, again, the largest of the, well, the largest or significant leader of the tribe. Reuben being the oldest son, the oldest of Jacob's sons. Judah being the largest. Dan being one of the largest. And then Ephraim, also large, but more importantly, one of the most powerful tribes in the land of Israel. Along with Benjamin and Manasseh, they're not necessarily the heartland, but they're the heart of Israel, because their area is where Jerusalem is located, and where, if you radiate out around it, Ephraim and Manasseh and Benjamin are the, if you will, the Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, Baltimore, around, again, this kind of mid-Atlantic center. And there are a lot of similarities in numbers to the, there are a lot of similarities in numbers and in the tribal organization to what we have in American history. So when we go back in American history and talk about how the formulation of the states kind of helped guide what we have, I mean, if you think about it, you've taken history, American history, that part of what was the equation in coming up with a constitution and forming the country was balancing off the large states, even in those days, versus the small states, and to give, the smaller states, greater representation. That's why we have a Senate. The reason we have the Senate is so that each state could put two people into this upper chamber of Congress and have as much power. It gave, a state like Delaware, Rhode Island, as much power as New York or South Carolina in those days, or Virginia, Massachusetts. And so this really did give small states power. And Israel had a similar thing, which is we want to keep our country together. We want to keep the tribes together. We want to have a national strength. And one of the ways we have to do that is we have to give even the smaller tribes representation and a place at the table, where we can't just make this about the larger tribes. I mean, essentially they could have said, look, we've got 4 tribes. We've got Ephraim, Manasseh, Judah, maybe Dan. Say, we don't, why do we need these little tribes? And so they didn't do that. They said, no, we're going to have the little tribes are going to have a seat at the table. They're going to have a place within our country. And their tribal head is listed with, like all the other tribal heads, he's listed in that list at the beginning. You don't know right away which tribe is the biggest tribe. So the arrangement also balances it out in some ways so that the little tribes aren't all together, that there's some strength and there's some strong tribes and there's some smaller tribes in each section, in each division. I mean, they don't come out equal, but they're close to that about 150,000 average that you need. So there's a balance to this. It balances everything. It balances everything out so that the place is kind of evenly. There's an even feng shui of the. I don't know if they called it that, but they had an even arrangement around it so that it would feel even. It would really be balanced. So let's take a look at the tribes, the tribal, the way that the tribes were, surrounded, or the way the center of this was still with the Levites. So let's go back to that and talk about how the Levites now are going to be counted out. So chapter 3 is where we get into the Levites. And so this is where we're going to get their count, if you will, their separate count. So it says, and again, the Levites, however, are not recorded among the Israelites. This is the line of Aaron and Moses at the time the Lord spoke with Moses at Sinai. Now, I think you hear within that phrase, that line, this understanding that this is the way it was. And there is this kind of like nostalgia to that line that almost kind of gives away that this isn't written at the time that it's being counted. And so here's the layout. We start with the Kohanim. We start with the priests that are the descendants of Aaron. And I know that some of you know this. There is an understanding here in Numbers, as there was in Leviticus, that the only people who can be Kohanim are the sons of Aaron. That means that the Levites, who do have a role to play, you just read, they helped take down and set up the tent. The people who could actually offer the sacrifices, though, are the Kohanim, are the actual descendants of Aaron. And this is the first group that we get. So we have the names. It says the names of Aaron's sons, Nadav and Abihu, Eleazar and Itamar. These were the names of Aaron's sons, the anointed priests who were ordained for priesthood. But as we read in Leviticus, Nadav and Abihu died by the will of the Lord when they offered alien fire before the Lord in the wilderness of Sinai. and they left no sons. So it was Eleazar and Ithamar who served as priests in the lifetime of their father Aaron. So those two younger sons are the ones who continue on. And the other ones, it says specifically there, Nadav and Abihu did not have children. So the priesthood is essentially halved at the beginning. It's halved by how big it could have been. And it says, the Lord spoke to Moses saying, advance the tribe of Levi and place them in attendance upon Aaron the priest to serve him. They shall perform the duties for him and for the whole community before the tent of meeting, doing the work of the tabernacle. They shall take charge of the furnishings of the tent of meeting, a duty on behalf of the Israelites, doing the work of the tabernacle. You shall assign the Levites to Aaron and to his sons. They are formally assigned to him from the Israelites. And so it says that the Levites' job is to help the Aaron people within their tribe. So they are a subsection. Aaron and his family are a subsection of the Levites, but the Levites' job is to help them. Again, it doesn't seem like that was always the case. It seems like there was a time in Israel's history where every Levite could offer up a sacrifice. The reason that it's specified here is probably to tell us, quite frankly, that that's not what we're doing anymore. The Levites don't get to do that. They get to help, but they don't get to do the sacrifices. And so this is probably telling us about one of the biggest shifts that we have in the Torah. Not a shift of anything other than who's in charge of the temple, but it's a really important shift. It's a shift towards a professional priesthood class within the Levites, and only Aaron's sons get to do it. In the book of Deuteronomy, by the way, which is the next book, the later book, we don't seem to have that. It doesn't seem to be as clear that it's only the Levites, it's only the Aaronites, only the Kohanim that get to do something. The Levites don't seem to be as marginalized in that book as they are in this book. Keep that in mind. We'll see that when we get into Deuteronomy. You'll see the Levites being referred to not in the way that you'd think that they would refer to the priests, even though technically it's the next book. I hereby take the Levites from among the Israelites in place of the firstborn. The first issue of the womb of among the Israelites, the Levites shall be mine. For every firstborn is mine. At the time I smote every firstborn in the land of Egypt, I consecrated every firstborn in Israel, man and beast, to myself, to be mine, the Lord's. Now, I'm not going to dwell on this too much because I posted something yesterday which is just about that line. And I felt, look, there is a line of Torah this week, as I believe there is a line of Torah every week, that can help us make sense of our lives. And I thought this line is an interesting one, and it's been commented on before from the standpoint of what's going on here? What's going on here? I'm not going to talk about what I said. Watch what I said before. It's about 3 minutes. I only want to say this, that's not repetitive, but helps you understand in a little more context. What's going on here? What is this line about? Because this is a line that really does stand out as being, well, I don't want to miss this. I don't want to just say this is a list of what people are, or which tribes are where and who stands where. God just said that after Passover, that after when we left Egypt, that the firstborn of everyone in Israel became mine. Now, there's a theory that this is telling us that Israel, the Israelites, were dealing with the common practice of child sacrifice, and that so many other nations had a tradition of sacrificing their firstborn child, that the Israelites either came from a culture where that was normal, or they had to respond to that. I don't think that's the case. I mean, some people think that's the case anthropologically, that's why it's there, that that's a common thing. But I don't think that's really what's going on here, because there's a level of detail to this that doesn't seem to be just about that. There is a sense in this that it's connected to the firstborn, the plague of the firstborn, where the firstborn child died in Egypt. And that after that, that's why the Israelites have to keep that. They have to remember that. Again, the argument is that that's an explanation for why the Israelites don't do child sacrifice, but that doesn't seem to make sense. That seems to be a stretch. That's taking something that you know existed and trying to find a reason for how we dealt with it. And I don't think that's necessarily really what's happening here. I think what really is happening here is that we processed the Exodus from Egypt in such a powerful way that we wanted to remind people every time they had a firstborn child that child was a miracle. Why? Because we never forget how close we were to death. And that's kind of what I talked about. That when you survive something and when you realize that there is a change in our perspective after coming into contact with death, you have to remember it, and you have to celebrate the fact that you're alive. And the Israelites did it. We did it. We figured out a way to turn a really scary experience. The smiting of the firstborn is pretty scary. We turn that into a touchstone, and we turn that into something that can inspire us every day and in every generation after. So that's what's going on in that kind of peculiar thing. And again, we talked about it when we read about it back in Exodus. This is the origin of the ritual of Pidyon Haben for the firstborn sons. That if you're a firstborn son, your mother never had a child before, never had a miscarriage, never had a daughter, that if you're a firstborn son, that you have to be redeemed by the priests. And essentially the priests give you back to your parents because you are God's. But here, what's interesting about it is that the Torah here is telling us that the Levites are taking the place of the firstborn. That the Levites are the Pidyon Haben. Forget redeeming from them. They themselves are the redemption here, which I think tells us what a firstborn son was supposed to be in the land of Israel. He was supposed to inherit the property from his family, but with that came a huge responsibility. That essentially the priests were taking their role, that the firstborn son was almost like a priest of his family. And some people have put forward the thought, the possibility, that the firstborn son was the one who was in charge of burying the parents, that the firstborn son took on the ritual of burial for the parents. And that was a really important job, and was one that almost made them kind of a priest within their own home. So that's one possibility.
I always say I'm the king of my castle.
You do have an older sister, but yes, the understanding is that as a firstborn that maybe firstborn son, that maybe that was different. It doesn't say here firstborn son. I do want to.
I'm imagining that's what they meant.
It doesn't say. Well, it seems as though because the Levites are taking their place, and it was only the Levite men that did this work. So it seems as though it's that, but it doesn't say it. It doesn't actually say it here, but it does have this. It does have this kind of understanding that it is an important status to be the firstborn child, or maybe firstborn son. So this is this line, which again, it's not necessarily the most important line in this chapter, but I find it to be a pretty important line. So I was reading it.
Oh, it does say, Rabbi, firstborn in Israel, man and beast. So
yeah, but the word for man here is Adam.
Oh, okay.
Adam ad behema. And again, as we know, the word Adam means human being.
Right.
I mean, if you really want to be a good translator, don't say man, say Adam, say human. Because we use the word Adam, is clearly a human being, would be a woman person too. So I like this line. I was reading it late Monday night, and it hit me. It kind of like, I said, yeah, that's a line that I think can help us make sense of today too. So if you want to hear more about it, please please do that.
Oh, it's a great 3 minutes, Rabbi.
Thanks. Thank you. I wrote it out all, like, took about 2 hours. It was like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, in that kind of time where I wasn't disturbed. I'm a little disturbed, a little disappointed, not disturbed. I'm disappointed that there aren't more people that are commenting on the Torah for our current situation. I'm surprised by it. And as I said, I've been reading Rabbi Sachs the last few weeks, as I do every week. I'm like, how is he not writing about this? And he wrote another one today for Numbers, and it's all about community and counting community and that kind of thing, which is obviously where you go with this. And there's nothing about this. It's almost like, again, he just recycled the part that, the one that he did previously. So I would love to read what he's writing about now, and maybe he's not, maybe he chose not to, but I know he doesn't like to be hyper relevant. He doesn't like to he wants I think he intends for his Divrei Torah to be able to be read 10 years from now.
Did you ever read what's his name? Label Wolf from Australia?
Yeah. Has he been writing about this? I
don't know. I haven't read him in a while. I once in a while I'll read his stuff, because I did meet him, had dinner with him actually one night.
I would love for people to be writing more about it. It's this is definitely a time of I'm looking at what he's posted lately. It doesn't seem that he's been posting about this. I know people, they worry about being, hyper relevant, like talking about something that just happened, because again, you put something out there and then you watch it 6 months later or a year later, not 6 months later, but usually, a couple years later, and you go, why would they make such a big deal about that? Nobody thinks about that anymore. This is pretty important. I mean, this is pretty life-changing, pretty much a pivot point in our lives. So I don't know. I don't know why more people aren't. All I know is that I felt like I got to do something about it, and and it wasn't forced. And I promise you, I'm not gonna force it. I mean, if I find something in the weekly portion, then I'll do it. But I kind of sat down and I said, you know what? I'm going to do it. And so I wrote it out. I usually don't necessarily write everything out word for word. That's why it looks like I'm reading it in there, because I am. So I don't usually do that. I don't like to look like I'm reading, but I did. So, but I didn't, I wanted to get to the point. And so, look, you know what, if I look like an idiot 2 years from now, I'll do it. But right now, how can you not make the Torah speak to us about this when it's all the news are talking? I mean, you can't watch the news. I hate watching the news now, because that's all it's about. And clearly there's got to be other stuff happening right now. And so how can the Torah not talk to us about this now? If everything else is, why not the Torah? So anyways, that's my commercial for why I did it. And I'll see if we continue to do it. So this is this is how we get a record of the Levites. So it says Moses recorded them. The sons of Levi by name are Gershon, Kohat, and Merari. So you got Aaron, you got Moses' brother Aaron, and then you have Gershon, Kohat, and Merari. So those are the four groups: Aaron's family, and then the Gershonites, the Kohathites, and the Merari.
So those are Moses' sons?
No. So let's look at who these people are. So you have Levi. Jacob's son Levi had 3 sons: Gershon, Kohat, and Merari. And then we get the grandsons of Levi. And by the way, this is why we have a little bit of a problem chronologically. Levi has 3 sons: Gershon, Kohat, and Merari. The names of the sons of Gershon are Livni and Shimei. The sons of Kohat are Amram, Izhar, Chevron, and Uziel. And the sons of Merari are Machli, Mushi, And those are the grandsons, if you will, of Levi. So Levi has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, sorry. What? Sorry. Levi has grandsons are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's 8 sons, grandsons that Levi has. The thing is Amram is Moses' father. So Amram is the ancestor of the Levites and the Kohanim. He's the father of Aaron and Moses.
Could that be another Amram?
No, this is Amram. That's the problem, is we have the list of where they went through. And so what I'm saying is that means that Moses and Aaron, if you go backwards, Moses and Aaron's father is Amram. Amram's father is Kohat, and Kohat's father is Levites. So if you have Levi, Kohat, Amram, and Moses, it means that Moses is only 3 generations removed from Levi.
Right.
And yet they were supposed to be slaves for 400 years. So this is where we have a little bit of a chronological math problem, if you will, that this doesn't explain, there doesn't seem to be enough generations here. And the author of Numbers doesn't seem to give us enough distance from these tribes, because we have the same issue, not just with the Levites, but with the other tribes as well, is that this seems to be the people that are, what I'm saying is the people that are here now standing in Mount and at Sinai Desert are only a few generations removed from the tribes when they went down. So this is a little bit of a problem. And so we have the numbers here. And here they're counted out from 1 month. The Levites are counted from the time of essentially viability. They're going to survive. And so we go through these tribes and what they're actually going to do. And again, because I'm going to show you one more time so that you can have it in your mind, in your mind's eye. Here's how they were spread apart. The Kohanim on one side, the Kohathites on one, the Gershonites on the opposite side, and the Merarites there. So here's the trick question for you. It's not really a trick question. Moses' brother, Aaron, and his family are here. Moses' family would have been here with the Kohathites. So Moses' family, his cousins, his immediate family is in this tribe, in that section, that clan section of the Levites. So these are all Levites all around it. And then this group is Moses' group. So everybody see that? That's where the tribes are on the outside, and the clans of the tribe of the Levites are on the inside.
So as a Levite, we don't know what clan we're from.
Nope. And so here it says right here, to Kohat belong the clan of the Amramites, which is essentially the Levites who were not were not from Aaron. So Moses's family was primarily here amongst the Amramites. Then you also have the Issacharites, right? So these are other Levites. These are other Levites that are part of Moses's, if you will, closer family. So Moses's family here would be here amongst the Amramites, except for obviously Aaron's family, which was already pulled out. The Issacharites, the Hebronites, and the Uzzielites. So again, in Hebrew, it's Amrami, Yitzharchi, Chevroni, and the Uzieli. Right? Now, the important thing here, too, is the Izharites. Does anybody know why the Izharites are important? Yitzharchi. In Hebrew, Yitzharchi, it's actually Yitzharchi in Hebrew. This group right here is where Korach, Moses' cousin, was the son of Izhar. So Korach and his family are Korach's grandson. So Amram and Izhar are brothers, which means that Moshe and Korach are cousins because their dads were brothers. And essentially, Moses and Korach were his family were in the, now again, where Moses' family was a good question, but were Moses' sons Gershom and Eliezer here with the Amramites, which was their group. That means that they're literally staying in the same place as Korach and his family. Korach, the one who rebelled against Moses. They're hanging out and staying in the same area. Their section, if you will, is the same section. They live in the same group. They're that close related that they're together. So here we go through the other tribes. I keep saying tribes, the other groups of Levites. These are all Levites. But you can see each one had a different responsibility. The Gershonites were in charge of the tent, its covering, and the screen for the entrance of the tent of meeting, what we call again the Ohel Moed. The hangings of the enclosure, the screen for the entrance of the enclosure, which surrounds the tabernacle, the cords thereof, and the altar. All the service connected with these. And then when we get to the Kohat group, it says their duties included the ark, the table, the lampstand, the altar, the sacred utensils, and the screen, all the service connected with those. So they're talking about other parts of the Mishkan that were theirs. So you can see it's a little bit different than what Gershon's group did. But Kohathites are in charge of the Aron, which is pretty important. That's the Ark of the Covenant. So next we get to the other side, which was Aaron and his family. What were they in charge with? Attending to the duties of the sanctuary. They are the ones who actually did the work. They weren't in charge necessarily of any of the items, but they were in charge of doing the work. And then we get Merari. What were their jobs? The planks of the tabernacle, its bars, posts, and sockets, and all its furnishings, all the service connected with these, also the posts around the enclosure, and their sockets, pegs, and cords. Now it seems to me like they got the worst end of this. The Merarites seem to have gotten a lot of the hard work and not any of the fancy stuff. They seem to be doing the heavy lifting. They're taking the planks, they're taking the poles. There actually seems to be the heavy duty lifters. And their work is super important, right? Because if you don't have the frame, if you don't have the boards and the weighty posts and the things that everything can sit on, you can't have the fancy stuff. You can't build the house until the foundation is poured and the frame and the drywall's up. You can't hang a picture without having a wall. But it doesn't seem like the most glamorous work. It seems like those guys are the ones who again did a lot of the heavy lifting. Those guys would have been not the interior decorators, the people who actually who actually were the carpenters and the heavy, the heavy duty stuff, more of the manual labor, were the Merarites. And this is how the Levites were again a subset, had responsibilities for the tabernacle, and again surround the tabernacle so that other people aren't coming even near it. They can look at it, they're going to offer sacrifices there, but they're really the ones that are kind of in close proximity to it and really taking care of the tent are the Levites. Does anybody want to does anybody want to comment on what's going on here with the Levites? It says right here, from 1 month and up, 22,000. So you can see 6,200, 8,600, 7,500. I'm missing one. 7,500, 8,600. Anyways, hold on a second. So does anybody want to guess what's going on here? Does anyone want to venture a guess of why we have the Levites separate from everybody else? Anybody want to jump in here? Don't all speak at once. Nobody? Hello? Are people there? So a couple people are there. No, everybody's there. Does anybody want to know what's going on with the Levites? I mean, come on. There's got to be a reason why these people are separate and not given work like the rest of the people. Nobody?
Someone has to maintain the tabernacle of the Mishkan.
Yeah, but there's yeah. Oh, by the way, just so you know, the Aaronites are counted amongst the Kohathites. That's why there's only it does add up to 20 people. So it's each one is roughly about 7,000. Anybody? Somebody chat it out. Okay. Okay, so Francine asked a very good question. What time do they start? At what age do they start the duties? So it says that they're counted up from the age of 30 days. So clearly they didn't start working in that, at that age. But they do seem to start doing work as young men. They already seem to be doing work as teenagers. That they're doing work. The Levites are helping to set up, and they're helping to do some work. So we do know that they started up as kids. But what's going on with the Levites? I mean, why are the Levites treated so separately? Anybody?
Moses' family.
Yeah, seems like that's maybe part of it, and that Moses' family is not going to take part in the same way as everybody else. Francine offered the fact that they don't fight. Well, they don't fight. Yeah, they don't fight. It seems to be connected to the same issue. They also don't get a piece of land, folks, when we come into the land of Israel. This layout that I showed you a couple times already also mirrors roughly the way the people live when they come into the land of Israel, when the tribes settle during the time of Joshua.
Judah was on the north, though, wasn't he?
No, Judah, yes, Judah is on the other end of where he is. He's on the east side. It's not the other end, but he's not in the south where he is, where he is in the land. But here's the list again. So he's on the east. So yeah, he would have been in the south, which is where Shimon is, and it's not exactly a layout of the land. It doesn't mirror, but what it does is it kind of does give us this understanding of a little bit of where these tribes were kind of located next to, who they were located. So Benjamin, Ephraim, and Manasseh are all kind of in the center of the country. But there seems to be this other understanding that this reflects what happens to some extent when the people come into the land of Israel. When the tribes come in, not everybody is going to be equally kind of set aside in that land. And most importantly, the Levites get no piece of the land. They get to be priests. They have a huge responsibility and they have a huge honor of being the priests of the people. But with that comes a big sacrifice, which is that they don't get an ancestral home to call their own. They don't get a border. They don't get a state. That's a huge, I mean, that has to be a huge consequence. That a group of people in a tribal confederation, any political confederation, don't get to live in any place in particular. It's kind of mind-boggling when you consider it. When you sit down and consider that as they're establishing their homeland, as they're figuring out, again, maybe an explanation for why they live the way they do, how can it be that the Levites don't get their own place? They don't get a border. There's no place that's the Levite homeland. They don't get a home. Their home is amongst all the people. Now, the traditional explanation for this is that the Levites needed to be amongst the people. They couldn't have a homeland because if there's a place where the Levites are, they're not with everybody else. The Levites had to be the priests for the people. So they had to live amongst the people so they could attend to the people. You can't have, and maybe the modern equivalent would be, you can't have every rabbi living in Israel because rabbis and teachers in the Jewish community need to live in the Jewish community. They got to live in Burbank and Santa Clarita and Kansas and Argentina and, Africa. Because if they all lived in Israel, who would live amongst the people? Who would help keep Jewish life, moving? Who would help people during life cycle events and do those kinds of things? They can't all live in one place. So that's one obvious possibility, which is if you allow them their own place, then they'll live there and then they won't live amongst the people. So this kind of ensures that from happening. Ensures that happening and that the opposite doesn't happen from happening.
They were also acting as, for all intents and purposes, judges too, right? When there was issues amongst
definitely, we just read about how they're kind of working as doctors and diagnosing disease. They have a huge role to play, obviously, amongst the people. And so they have to be amongst the people. Once they're concentrated, by the way, in the city of Jerusalem, we get problems. When we move to that centralized cult, if you will, it's called a cult, but the centralized religious center, and it's called a cult because that's what anthropologists call it. We don't mean a cult in the same way, but the cultic center, the religious center of Jerusalem, that was a problem for the Jewish people. That it helped create a sense of a unified country by having a capital, but the trade-off was that it took away the priests from being in the local community, and it consolidated power amongst the priests in one area. And what happened by the time of the Greco-Roman period is the priests, the Kohanim, became kings. And that's literally what happened. They were never supposed to be kings. But by the time of Judah Maccabee, his descendants, his brother, and more importantly, his nephew, Simon, his brother's family, the ones that become the Maccabean kings, the survivors, because all the other Maccabean brothers, the 4 other brothers, are killed in battle. But Simon survives and his family become the Hasmonean dynasty. They are kings. They call themselves kings. King Hyrcanus, King Aristobulus. I mean, a lot of them, they had the same names. They kept repeating the names. But these guys, Alexander, King Alexander Jannaeus, these were kings that were priests and now became kings. This was exactly what we were not supposed to have happen. we were supposed to have a priesthood that was separate, that had a separate power, had a check and balance system. It was never supposed to be priest kings. And so this is what the diffusion of priests amongst the people would prevent. But again, by the time of King David and then moving forward, that plan of consolidation of the priesthood came into power, so that even by the time of the destruction of the first temple in 586, so literally 600 years before the Maccabees, or 500 years before the Maccabees ever lived, the priests were already too powerful. And by the time of those people, they owned Jerusalem. By the time of Jeremiah, for example, the priest had way too much power. Now, there were still a king, though. There were still kings like the Davidic line that were a check to that power. But the priest owned much of Jerusalem by that period. And by the time of the Greco-Roman period, they had all the power. So that's not something that was supposed to happen. It was not the way things were supposed to be. And so it didn't, the system became a flawed system. It wasn't intended that way, but that's the way it ended up manifesting as a system that became corrupted when power got centralized into one geographical area. So keep that in mind, that the Torah actually envisioned the priests living amongst the people, the Levites at least living amongst the people. And once the priesthood becomes, the Kohanim become the only ones in charge in Jerusalem, it's set in motion. And again, it was done for noble reasons. The idea that David had and that the priests had of being able to consolidate power into one place was basically to say, how can we fight our enemies? How can we be a unified country if we don't have a unified capital? If we don't have centralized power where people can come to one place and, and then power be sent out to the different tribes, then we're going to be weak
But there were a lot of fighting amongst them, the North and the South.
Yes. But that was the trade-off. The trade-off was, in a tribal configuration, the tribes function like states. And we always have this problem. We have this issue of who has power, where does the power, who has power? And again, we know that there are trade-offs. We can't have a strong government or a strong entity on our behalf unless they're getting a lot of tax money and unless they have a lot of infrastructure. It doesn't work. And so you need to have numbers in order to have that happen. There needs to be a critical mass of power in a place. But we see it all the time. We see it on a level here in our country where we always have tension between states and the federal government. And I got news for you. We're seeing it now, maybe for the first times in our lives, in many of our lives, on a big level between the city and the county right now, and between Santa Clarita and the county. And when these issues become manifest, suddenly all politics become local. Because when people in Santa Clarita are arguing over the fact that LA City is causing us as a county to respond to this in a way that maybe as a part of our county, and I don't know if anybody saw the city council meeting the week before that the Santa Clarita City Council meeting I'm talking about. There was a unanimous decision by our city council to basically tell the county, we don't need you because we're a different part of the county than LA. And we don't want LA to be dictating to us when we can open things. We understand that LA has a different dynamic, and we don't want to be part of that dynamic. So here you saw on a micro level, this issue when it manifests itself in our daily lives. We don't want people in downtown LA to dictate to us when we can open our stuff. So this is really interesting that this issue of politics of who controls things and what we have to give up and what we're willing to give up when it comes to to having powerful and strong communities, this is a tension that is very relevant to us today in our community. It's obviously it's a national issue too, but it is very much right now in Santa Clarita an issue that, if you're paying attention, I hope you are, this is something that people are talking about out here. And so, it's a possibility that our northern part of LA County, us and the Antelope Valley, they had discussions about, kind of putting our own emergency response into effect that would have nothing to do with the rest of LA County. Anyways, it is another example of how the Torah, depending on when you read it, nothing I would have thought of last year. I never would have thought about the division of tribes and what how this Torah portion speaks to us.
Well, that's why we read the Torah every year.
But right now, oh my gosh, I was thinking about tribal portions and what it's like when you're trying to be part of a bigger community, but at the same time having your own community's needs met. Definitely something we're thinking about. So again, to remind people, next week we have class on Wednesday, but we also have Thursday night, our Shavuot study session, which you've been hypnotized by. The Zoom information is there. We're going to send it out in email again to remind people to join us Thursday. Please come Thursday at 6:30 to be part of our Shavuot study session. And again, the other thing that we want to remind you is that next Tuesday night, we'll have a fun and interactive cooking class, which is going to be a chance for us to make some Shavuot food. That's May 26th at 6 p.m. Tuesday night. And that is from our kitchen. And we're going to have even better filming than we had last time. I've got lights now. You can't see them because it's too light, but I have a big old light. I'm going to show you right now. Take this down. This is my light right here. So we have lights now, professional grade lights. We're going to have in the kitchen. I had them here tonight. So we're going to have lights in the kitchen, and we also have a little better camera work. I want it to look good. I want to make my wife look like Rachel Ray. She's going to be like Martha Stewart. She's going to be the English Martha Stewart. So that's Tuesday night. Tonight, again, we want to remind people as we are going to now we've begun as we were talking, the counting of the Omer. And tonight, again, we go into this get into the final week of the counting of Omer tonight. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al sfirat haOmer. We thank you, God, for the counting of the Omer now. Hayom shnayim va'arba'im yom shehem shisha shavuot la'omer. Today is 42 days, which is 6 weeks of the Omer. And we're about to again get into the last week of counting of the Omer. So we're 1 day away, if you will, from the final week. So we're very close to the counting of the Omer. So again, we hope everybody stays healthy and safe. I want to, we have one other thing I want to remind you. Friday night, of course, our Friday night service. This Friday night, this weekend, if you will, this Friday, we're also celebrating on the more modern Hebrew calendar. We're celebrating Yom Yerushalayim, the time that we celebrate on Thursday night to Friday, the reunification of Jerusalem. That in 1967, that we once again were able to pray for the first time in thousands of years as free people at the Kotel. And the images of Jews coming to the Kotel is something that's very powerful. So we're going to have some special songs and some images of Jerusalem, of Yerushalayim, this weekend, this Friday night, this Shabbat, because it actually is Friday, is Yom Yerushalayim. So that's another thing to think about this week. How lucky we are in our own days that capital of the Jewish people is once again our capital and is a place that Jews can worship in, and people of all religions can worship in safely and with freedom. So again, we wish you a good rest of the week, and hopefully we'll see you sometime at Shabbat. Make sure you share with us the people that we need to pray for Misha Berach too that night. And if there's any other people that you need to add for Kaddish, please let us know too. All right, everybody, stay safe and healthy, and we will see you very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.